The F-22 Raptor banked hard over the silver waters of the Strait of Hormuz. Outside, the humid air of the Gulf shimmered with heat. Below, the red rocks of Keshem Island looked like jagged teeth rising from the sea. Major Elias Miller checked his sensors for the third time in 2 minutes. The cockpit of the Raptor was a silent sanctuary of glass and carbon fiber. This was supposed to be a standard combat air patrol, but today was not standard. His stealth displays were showing a ghost. Something was painting his airframe with a fire control radar that should not have been able to find him. The question that burned in his mind was simple. How could an aging Iranian interceptor see a ghost? Miller felt the sweat slicking his palms inside his flight gloves. He was flying the most advanced air dominance fighter in history. He was invisible to the world. Yet, the warning tone in his headset was steady. It was a persistent, high-pitched chirp that meant someone was looking right at him. This was a violation of everything he knew about aerial warfare. The Raptor was designed to be a phantom. It was designed to kill before the enemy even knew a fight had started. Now, the roles were reversed. The pilot spoke into his radio. "Magic. This is Ghost 1-1. I have a persistent search track on my tail. Confirm any friendly assets in the sector." The controller responded from the E-3 Sentry aircraft, circling 100 miles to the south. "Ghost 1-1. Magic. Negative. You are the only blue air in that box. We are painting a single bogey. Bearing 350. Range 18 miles. Altitude 32,000 feet. Speed is Mach 0.9. Magic. Classify that contact," Miller said. "Contact is an Iranian F-4 Phantom. He is coming straight at you, Ghost." Miller adjusted his seat. He pulled the stick to the left, initiating a sharp 5G turn to see if the track would break. It did not. The symbol on his helmet-mounted display stayed locked on his 6 o'clock position. The Phantom was mirroring his every move with impossible precision. It was as if there was an invisible tether connecting the two aircraft. The F-4 was a heavy, twin-engine beast from a different era. It should have been physically impossible for that aircraft to maintain a tracking solution on a maneuvering stealth fighter. Inside the cockpit of the Iranian F-4, Colonel Reza Abbas ignored the protesting groans of his airframe. The Phantom was screaming. The wings vibrated with the stress of the high-speed pursuit. Beside him, his weapon systems officer was focused on a specialized tablet mounted over the traditional radar scope. The tablet was not Iranian military hardware. It was a sleek, black device that hummed with a low, cooling fan. "The link is stable," the officer said. His voice was tight with adrenaline. "We have the signature. The American is trying to break the lock." "He will not break it," Abbas replied. "Not today." Abbas looked out through the scratched plexiglass of his canopy. He could not see the Raptor with his eyes yet. The sky was too vast and the American jet was too small. But he could see the digital ghost on his screen. He felt a surge of professional pride. He had been flying the Phantom for 20 years. He knew its every rattle and every scent of hydraulic fluid. He knew he was flying a machine that belonged in a museum. But with the black box active, he was more dangerous than anything else in the sky. He adjusted the throttle. The twin engines dumped raw fuel into the afterburners. 2 massive plumes of orange flame erupted behind him. The force of the acceleration slammed him back into his seat. He was closing the gap. In his mind, he was already counting the seconds. He needed to get closer. He needed to reach the point where the missiles were no longer necessary. He wanted to see the Raptor with his own eyes. He wanted to prove that the ghost could bleed. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 10:21 in the morning, Major Elias Miller slammed the stick to the right and kicked the rudder. The F-22 Raptor screamed as it pulled 9 Gs. The pressure suit around his legs and abdomen inflated instantly. It crushed his flesh to keep the blood in his brain. His vision began to tunnel. Gray fringes crept into the corners of his eyes. He held the turn for 4 seconds. This was a maneuver designed to shake any conventional radar lock. No third-generation fighter like the Phantom should have been able to stay synchronized with this rate of turn. The airframe of an F-4 would normally snap under this kind of stress. Miller leveled out and glanced at his tactical display. The ghost was still there. The green symbol for the Iranian interceptor had not drifted by a single degree. It was perfectly centered in his rear quarter. It was as if the Phantom were an extension of his own wings. Miller felt a cold sweat break across his forehead. This was more than just a radar lock. This was something he had never encountered in a decade of flying stealth. His heart hammered against his ribs. The Raptor was supposed to be the apex predator. Now, it felt like a bird with a clipped wing. The pilot keyed his radio again. His voice was strained from the G-force. Magic. Ghost 1-1. I am executing a brake turn. Target is still merged. He is matching my turn rate exactly. Confirm his speed and altitude. The controller on the E3 Sentry sounded shaken. Ghost 1-1. Magic. We see it. He is at Mach 0.95. Altitude is 31,800 feet. Ghost. We do not understand how he is holding that line. His airframe should be fluttering. We are seeing zero deviation. 10:23 in the morning, inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The atmosphere had shifted from routine to high alert. The dim blue light of the room reflected off the faces of 40 technicians. Captain Sarah Vance stood behind the primary radar console. She watched the two digital tracks over the Gulf. They were so close together, they nearly overlapped. Get me a direct line to the Raptor, Vance ordered, and tell the Super Hornets on the deck to prepare for an immediate launch. I want a foreship of F-18s in the air in 5 minutes. Ma'am, we are in international airspace, but the Iranian is technically within his rights to intercept, a junior officer noted. He is not intercepting, Vance replied. Her voice was flat and hard. He is hunting. Look at that flight path. He is not flying a standard intercept. He is flying a pursuit curve that requires a digital link we did not think they possessed. If he closes another 2 miles, he is in weapons range. 10:24 in the morning, Colonel Reza Abbas felt the Phantom vibrating violently. The old jet was not meant for this. The rivets in the wings were groaning. The smell of hot oil and ozone filled the small cockpit. Beside him, the weapons systems officer was adjusting dials on the mysterious black tablet. The screen showed a complex waveform that pulsed in time with the Raptor's movements. "We are inside 12 miles, the officer shouted over the roar of the engines. "The signature is locked. The American cannot hide. The device is slaving our flight controls to his exhaust signature." Abbas gripped the stick with both hands. He could feel the computer-assisted overrides twitching in his palms. The black box was doing the heavy lifting. It was calculating the Raptor's position based on minute fluctuations in the air. It was a technology that bypassed radar entirely. It was something foreign, something experimental. Abbas did not care where it came from. He only cared that it worked. He saw a speck of silver in the distance. It was a tiny, jagged shape against the blue sky. "Visual contact," Abbas whispered. "I see him." He pushed the throttles forward. The Phantom surged. He was no longer just following. He was positioning for the kill. He did not intend to fire a missile. A missile could be spoofed. A missile could be jammed. He wanted to get close enough to use the cannon. He wanted the world to see the gun camera footage of a Raptor in the crosshairs of a 50-year-old jet. 10:25 in the morning, Major Miller looked over his shoulder. He saw the twin black smoke trails of the Phantom. It was closing fast. The Iranian pilot was not breaking away. He was coming in for a close-range engagement. Miller realized with a jolt of adrenaline that his stealth was useless now. The enemy had eyes on him. "Magic. Ghost 1-1, Miller said. "He is closing for a visual engagement. I am requesting permission to arm weapons for self-defense." The radio stayed silent for 2 seconds. It was the longest 2 seconds of Miller's life. Ghost 1-1. "Magic, stand by. We are communicating with National Command." Miller watched the Phantom grow larger in his canopy. The Iranian jet pulled a sudden, high-alpha maneuver. It was a move that defied the physics of the Heavy Four. The nose of the Phantom pitched up sharply while the aircraft continued forward. It was a Cobra-style maneuver that should have stalled the engines. Instead, the Phantom dropped into a perfect slot behind the Raptor. Miller's heart stopped. The Iranian was now in the classic guns position. He was exactly where a pilot goes when they are about to shred an enemy with lead. "He is on me," Miller yelled. "He has the slot." The 11-second clock began. Major Elias Miller stared into his head-up display. The green circle was flashing. It was a guns tracking solution from the Iranian 4. The tone in his headset was no longer a chirp. It was a solid, unrelenting hum. The F-22 Raptor was being hunted like a common bird. Miller felt the vibration of the Phantom's engines through his own airframe. They were that close. The pilot's voice was a low growl over the encrypted channel. Magic. Ghost 1-1. I am being tracked for a gun solution. The bogey is inside 1,000 feet. I am defensive. I repeat, I am defensive. The controller on the E3 Sentry felt the blood drain from his face. Ghost 1-1. Magic. We copy. You are defensive. Do not, I repeat, do not initiate engagement unless the target fires. National Command is monitoring. On the bridge of the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, the alarms began to wail. The sound was a rhythmic, piercing shriek. General quarters. The massive ship began to turn into the wind. Sailors scrambled to their stations. Below the flight deck, the hangars were a hive of activity. Engines roared to life. The smell of burning JP-5 fuel filled the air. Captain Sarah Vance stood in the Combat Information Center. The room was bathed in an eerie red light. The screens showed the two aircraft locked in a lethal dance. The distance between them was now measured in hundreds of feet. What are we looking at, Chief? Vance asked. The senior radar technician shook his head. The Iranian is using a low probability of intercept signal. Our systems are struggling to categorize it. It is not standard 4 radar. It is something else. It is jumping frequencies every millisecond. It is mimicking the Raptor's own electronic signature to mask itself. Vance leaned over the table. He is using our own stealth against us? That is impossible. Only a handful of nations have that technology. And Iran is not on that list. Someone gave it to them. Ma'am, the technician replied. Or someone is testing it for them. If that Phantom pulls the trigger, the Raptor is gone. Miller cannot maneuver out of a gun track at this range. The physics are against him. Inside the Iranian Phantom, the air was thick with the smell of scorched insulation. The black tablet was glowing a fierce violet color. The weapons systems officer was breathing in short, shallow gasps. He was watching the data streams merge. The Raptor was perfectly centered in their crosshairs. It was a beautiful sight. The jagged, charcoal gray wings of the American jet were close enough to see the individual rivets. We have him, the officer said. Colonel, we have the lock. The computer is holding the lead. Just squeeze the trigger. Colonel Reza Abbas did not move his finger to the trigger. He was a professional. He knew that the moment he fired, the world changed. He knew that the American Carrier Strike Group was already preparing a retaliatory strike. He knew that his own life would end seconds after the Raptor exploded. He was not looking for a war. He was looking for respect. No, Abbas said. His voice was steady. We hold the position. Let them see that their ghost is not a god. Let them feel the shadow for as long as we can. He adjusted the stick with a feather-light touch. The Phantom was buffeting. The air coming off the Raptor's wings was turbulent. It felt like driving a car on a gravel road at 100 miles per hour. But the black box was adjusting the flight surfaces. It was making thousands of micro-corrections per second. It was a masterpiece of electronic warfare. Major Miller looked to his left. He could see the Iranian pilot. He could see the dark visor of the colonel's helmet. They were flying wing to wing now, but the Iranian was slightly behind. The position was dominant. It was an insult. Magic, Miller said. His voice was trembling with a mix of rage and fear. He is looking at me. He is not firing. He is just holding. Copy. Ghost, the controller replied. Hold your course. Do not deviate. We have 4 Super Hornets approaching your position. ETA is 3 minutes. The Iranian pilot maintained the lock. The seconds began to tick away. The tension was a physical weight. The air was ready to ignite. 10:31 in the morning, the 11-second clock began. Major Elias Miller watched the digital timer on his secondary display. Each second felt like a heavy hammer blow against his chest. In his peripheral vision, he could see the silhouette of the Iranian F-4 Phantom. It was a jagged, dark ghost against the pale blue sky. The Iranian pilot was not just following him. He was occupying the same space, mirroring every tremor of the Raptor's flight path. The gun tracking tone in Miller's headset was constant. It was a flat, electronic scream that signaled a perfect solution. If the Iranian squeezed the trigger, a stream of 20mm shells would tear through the Raptor's titanium skin in less than half a second. 1, 2, 3. Miller held the stick steady. His instructions were clear. He was not to initiate a maneuver that could be interpreted as hostile, but being held in a gun track was the ultimate hostility. 4, 5, 6. Miller's breath was shallow. He could see the individual rivets on the Phantom's nose. He could see the dark, hollow circle of the M61 Vulcan cannon. It was pointed directly at his cockpit. He felt a primal, shivering fear that no amount of training could suppress. He was the most advanced predator in the sky, and he was being humiliated by a relic of the Cold War. 7, 8, 9. Inside the Iranian cockpit, Colonel Reza Abbas checked his own timer. The black tablet was vibrating on its mount. The screen was a chaotic swirl of purple and gold data, feeding a stream of false telemetry into the Raptor's sensors. Abbas felt a strange sense of calm. He had proven his point. He had held the most powerful nation on Earth at the end of his finger for nearly 10 seconds. 10, 11, 10:32 in the morning, Abbas slammed the stick to the left and pulled back. The 4 Phantom rolled violently away from the Raptor. It was a high-speed brake that sent the old aircraft into a steep, descending spiral toward the Iranian coastline. The gun track tone in Miller's headset snapped into a sudden, jarring silence. The pressure was gone. The shadow was lifted. Magic. Ghost 1-1. Miller exhaled. His voice was a ragged whisper. Target has broken contact. He is diving. Bearing 030. Altitude dropping through 20,000 feet. The controller on the E3 Sentry sounded as if he had just run a marathon. Copy. Ghost. We see the break. We have him on primary radar now. He is heading for Bandar Abbas. You are clear. Repeat. You are clear. 10:33 in the morning, the tactical vacuum that followed was almost as suffocating as the pursuit. Miller leveled his wings and checked his fuel. He was burning JP-8 at an alarming rate. His hands were still shaking. He looked out at the empty sky where the Phantom had been just seconds ago. It felt like a dream. It felt like a glitch in reality. Magic, Miller said, his voice regaining some of its professional edge. That was not a standard 4. I need an immediate diagnostic on my sensor suite. Something was messing with my head-up display. My tracking was jumping. Copy that, Ghost, the controller replied. We are seeing some strange artifacts on our end too. It looks like he left a digital footprint in your system. We are trying to isolate it now. 10:34 in the morning, on the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, 4 F-18 Super Hornets were taxiing toward the catapults. The steam from the launch system drifted across the deck like a ghost. The pilots were strapped in, their engines whining at a high idle. Hold those birds, Captain Sarah Vance ordered from the Combat Information Center. The immediate threat has withdrawn, but I want them on 5-minute alert. And get me a satellite sweep of that Iranian coastal battery at Jask. If they were feeding that Phantom data, I want to know what kind of dishes they are running. Vance watched the replay of the encounter on the large wall screen. The way the Phantom had moved was wrong. It was too fluid. It was too fast for its airframe. It was as if the aircraft was being controlled by an intelligence that understood the Raptor's weaknesses better than the Americans did. 10:35 in the morning, the 4 Super Hornets finally reached Miller's position. They formed a protective diamond around the Raptor. To an outside observer, it looked like a standard escort mission. But to the pilots in the cockpits, it felt like a funeral procession for the myth of American air invincibility. Guardian lead to Ghost 1-1, the lead Super Hornet pilot called out. We have your back, Elias. You okay? Miller looked at the gray wings of his wingmen. He felt a small measure of security, but the cold knot in his stomach remained. I am fine, Guardian, Miller replied. But that Iranian pilot, he knew. He knew exactly how long he could hold me. 11 seconds. He was counting. The Iranian pilot had disappeared into the haze of the coastline, but he had left something behind. A message. A warning. And as Miller turned his nose back toward the carrier, he realized the mission had only just begun. The rules of the Gulf had changed while he was in that 11-second shadow. 10:36 in the morning. The tension in the Persian Gulf did not dissipate with the Iranian pilot's departure. Instead, it thickened like a storm front. On the radar screens of the USS Abraham Lincoln, new contacts began to bloom along the Iranian coastline. These were not aircraft. They were high-intensity radiating sources. The electronic warfare officers in the Combat Information Center identified them instantly. They were the signatures of Russian-made S-300 surface-to-air missile batteries. Captain Sarah Vance watched the red symbols blinking on the glass table. "They are illuminating our cap. They have a solid lock on Miller and the Super Hornets. Status on the seed package? The suppression of enemy air defenses is 4 minutes out, ma'am," the tactical officer replied. 2 EA-18G Growlers are screaming in from the south, but the Iranians are jumping frequencies. They are not staying on one channel long enough for a hard jam. The Iranians were not retreating. They were baiting the trap. 10:38 in the morning. Inside the cockpit of the lead Super Hornet, Commander Mark Viper Sullivan felt the vibration of the radar warning receiver. The sound was a rhythmic, low-pitched growl. It meant a ground-based radar was painting his airframe, searching for a firing solution. He looked at the Raptor flying 500 feet to his left. Major Miller's jet was silent, its stealth features working to deflect the incoming pulses. But Sullivan's F-18 was a beacon in the sky. "Guardian lead to Ghost 1-1, Sullivan said. "We have multiple paint jobs from the coast. Jask is hot. Bandar Abbas is hot. They are looking for a reason to launch." "Copy, Guardian," Miller replied. "My systems are showing a secondary source, not ground-based. It is coming from a surface vessel. Bearing 045. Sullivan shifted his gaze to the water below. A small, fast-moving wake was visible against the dark blue of the Gulf. It was an Iranian Hudong-class missile boat. These vessels were small, but they carried a lethal sting. 802 anti-ship missiles. And today, this boat was carrying something else. A tall, spindly antenna array was mounted on its aft deck, glowing with a faint blue light. 10:40 in the morning. Inside the Iranian missile boat, the atmosphere was frantic. The crew was working in a cramped, windowless compartment filled with the hum of high-voltage electronics. The same black tablet that had been in the Phantom was now plugged into the boat's main computer. The screen was displaying a real-time tactical map of the Gulf, with the American aircraft highlighted in bright, pulsing yellow. "The Americans are committed," the Iranian commander said. "They are within the kill zone of the coastal batteries. Activate the secondary link. We need to synchronize the strike." "Commander, the American Growlers are approaching," a technician warned. "They will attempt to jam us. Let them try," the commander replied. "The black box is not a radio. It is a quantum tether. They cannot jam what they do not understand." 10:41 in the morning. The 2 American Growlers arrived on station, their massive jamming pods glowing with electromagnetic energy. They flooded the airwaves with white noise, attempting to drown out the Iranian radars. For a moment, it seemed to work. The red symbols on the Lincoln's screens flickered and dimmed. But then, the interference cleared. The Iranian signals surged back, stronger than before. They were no longer jumping frequencies. They were locked onto a single, precise coordinate, Ghost 1-1. Magic. The controller's voice was urgent. "We have a launch. Multiple launches from the coast. 6 missiles in the air. They are tracking you, Miller. Break. Break. Break." 10:42 in the morning. The sky over the Strait of Hormuz was suddenly streaked with white smoke. The S-300 missiles were accelerating at Mach 4. Major Miller slammed his throttles into afterburner, the Raptor's twin engines erupting with 60,000 pounds of thrust. He pulled the jet into a vertical climb, his G-suit crushing his legs. "Guardian lead." "I am defensive," Sullivan yelled. "Flares! Flares! Flares!" The Super Hornets began to pump out magnesium flares, creating a trail of brilliant white stars behind them. But the Iranian missiles did not follow the heat. They ignored the flares. They ignored the chaff. They were being guided by the invisible tether from the missile boat below. Both sides were now fully committed. The era of shadowboxing was over. The Gulf was about to become a shooting gallery. The missiles closed the gap in seconds. The first explosion was a wall of orange fire that blotted out the sun. 10:43 in the morning. The first Iranian S-300 missile detonated 300 feet above the water. It was a proximity-fused warhead that exploded in a perfect ring of steel shards. The shockwave slammed into the leading EA-18G Growler, the American jamming aircraft. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Static Jenkins felt the concussion compress her chest against the seat harness. The cockpit glass spiderwebbed instantly. The second missile tracked the heat signature of the No. 2 Super Hornet, piloted by Lieutenant James Rook Miller. The warhead punched clean through the starboard engine intake. The detonation occurred inside the turbine housing. The engine disintegrated instantly, spraying molten titanium blades through the fuselage. The right wing of the Super Hornet was shredded. The outer 3 feet sheared off by the force of the blast. The aircraft snapped into a violent, asymmetric roll to the right. Ejecting! Ejecting! Rook's voice was cut off. The ejection seat fired with a twin-stage rocket motor. The seat blasted through the canopy, throwing the pilot clear of the fireball. 1 second later, the Super Hornet's main fuel cell ignited. The fighter disappeared in a rolling sphere of orange and black. Debris scattered outward in 1,000 directions. The burning fragments hissed as they touched the surface of the Gulf, sending up plumes of white steam. Major Elias Miller watched his wingman's aircraft vanish. He did not hesitate. The Raptor's internal weapons bay doors snapped open in less than a second. 2 AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles dropped into the slipstream. Their solid fuel motors ignited with a shriek of tearing metal. The missiles accelerated toward the Iranian Hudong-class boat. Their radar seekers locked onto the pulsing blue light of the antenna array. The first AMRAAM struck the missile boat amidships. The kinetic energy alone caved in the thin steel hull before the warhead detonated. The explosion ripped the vessel apart, cutting it nearly in half. The aft section, containing the mysterious antenna, was thrown 20 feet into the air. The forward section stayed afloat for exactly 4 seconds before the weight of the water in the engine room pulled it straight down. The heat blast from the sinking ship swept across the surface of the water, visible even from 10,000 feet. Smoke, thick and oily, climbed from the wreckage. Magic. Ghost 1-1. Impact confirmed on the surface contact, Miller reported. His breath was ragged in the mask. Guardian 2 is down. I have a visual on 1 parachute. I am Winchester on long-range ordnance, moving to intercept the remaining inbound tracks. 3 seconds of dead silence fell across the primary radio frequency. Every pilot in the air held their breath. The Iranian coastal batteries began to cycle their radars at maximum power. The American carrier group responded by launching the remaining alert fighters. The sky was filled with the smell of burning propellant and the sight of expanding gray clouds where million-dollar machines had just ceased to exist. 10:46 in the morning. The pivot occurred not with a bang, but with a total electronic collapse. Major Elias Miller was preparing to lock on to a second Iranian missile boat when his entire cockpit went black. The glass displays, the head-up display, and the fly-by-wire trim all flickered once and died. For 3 seconds, the F-22 Raptor was a 20-ton brick of titanium falling through the sky. Miller grabbed the mechanical backup stick, his heart hammering against his ribs. Magic. Ghost 1-1. I have total power loss. I am gliding. Altitude 34,000 feet. Everything is dark. There was no response. The radio was a dead weight in his helmet. Miller looked to his left and saw the remaining Super Hornets. They were banking wildly, their pilots clearly struggling with the same catastrophic failure. Below them, the Iranian coastal batteries, which had been seconds away from a second volley, suddenly went silent. The high-intensity radar signatures vanished from the environment. 10:48 in the morning. The ocean below was suddenly occupied by a third party. A massive bioluminescent shape began to rise from the depths of the Strait of Hormuz. It was not a submarine. It was a perfect, seamless teardrop of silver-gray material, nearly 400 meters long. As it breached the surface, it did not create a splash. It displaced the water with a low, harmonic hum. It vibrated through the hulls of every ship and the airframes of every jet in a 50-mile radius. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln, every screen was frozen on a single image. It was a mathematical proof, written in a symbolic language that no human computer could translate. Captain, the senior technician whispered, the Iranian signal, the black box. It was not theirs. It was a beacon. They were using it to draw us into a specific coordinate. Captain Vance looked at the giant silver shape on the primary optical feed. Who does that belong to? Nobody on Earth, ma'am, the technician replied. The thermal signature is absolute zero. It is absorbing every watt of energy we throw at it. The missiles that hit our boys. They were not guided by Iran. They were being steered by that thing. 10:49 in the morning, the Iranian pilots were reacting with the same terror. Colonel Reza Abbas watched as the silver object emitted a pulse of soft, amber light. The pulse swept across the sky at the speed of sound. As it passed through his aircraft, his engines restarted instantly. His displays came back to life, but they were no longer showing his instruments. They were showing a countdown. 9, 8, 7, disengage, a voice whispered in his headset. It was a voice that sounded like shifting sand. The engagement is terminated. Abbas did not wait for orders from Tehran. He slammed his stick over and fled toward the mountains. Behind him, the American Raptor and the Super Hornets also found their power restored. 10:50 in the morning, the silver object began to descend. It did not sink. It simply merged with the water. The only evidence of its existence was a perfectly circular patch of calm, glassy water in the middle of a churning strait. Magic. Ghost 1-1, Miller said, his voice trembling. I have power. I am heading for the boat. Did anyone else see that? We saw it, Ghost, the controller replied. National Command has issued a Level 1 lockdown. Do not talk on open frequencies. This mission is officially classified as a non-event. Miller looked down at the spot where his wingman had died. The smoke was still rising. The cost was real. But the enemy was no longer the man in the Phantom. The enemy was something that had just stopped a war as easily as a human might turn off a light. The calm of the silver object's departure was a lie. As the mysterious craft vanished beneath the waves, the electronic vacuum it left behind was instantly filled by the roar of human aggression. The Iranian Coastal Command, believing the American Ghost ship was a weapon of mass destruction deployed by the Carrier Strike Group, initiated a full-scale retaliatory strike. They did not target the aircraft. They targeted the source. Magic. Magic. Multiple vampire alerts. 70-plus anti-ship missiles inbound from the mainland, Jask, Bandar Abbas, Bushehr. They are all firing. Surface to surface and air to surface. It is a saturation strike. Captain Sarah Vance did not blink. Intercept. Launch every remaining bird. Activate the Aegis system. We are in a fight for our lives. The second combat climax began with the screech of the USS Abraham Lincoln's Mark 15 Phalanx close-in weapon system. The radar-guided Gatling gun opened fire at a range of 1.5 miles, spewing 4,500 rounds of tungsten penetrators per minute. The lead Iranian K-102 missile, skimming just 10 feet above the waves at Mach 0.9, took a direct hit to its seeker head. The missile did not just crash, it detonated inside its own kinetic energy. The warhead exploded outward, creating a massive wall of white water and fire. The second missile punched through the curtain of spray and slammed into the side of an escort destroyer, the USS Higgins. The 500-pound high-explosive warhead penetrated the thin aluminum skin of the superstructure and detonated inside the ship's galley. The explosion blew the entire portside bulkhead outward, throwing jagged shards of steel and heavy kitchen equipment into the ocean. Fire ignited instantly, fed by broken fuel lines. The heat blast was so intense it melted the non-skid coating on the deck above. The American response was catastrophic. Major Elias Miller, his Raptor systems fully restored and fueled by a cold, white rage, dove from 30,000 feet. He slaved his remaining ground attack ordnance to the heat signatures of the Iranian launch trucks visible on the coast. Ghost 1-1. Fox 4, Miller growled. The small-diameter bombs fell away. They guided themselves with terrifying precision. The first bomb struck a mobile missile launcher tucked beneath a camouflage net near Jask. The impact punched through the truck's cab and detonated the remaining 3 missiles on their rails. The entire cliffside disintegrated. A fireball that turned the sky white rose 500 feet into the air. The shockwave slammed into the nearby village. On the water, a second Iranian missile boat attempted to flee. A pair of Super Hornets caught it in their sights. They did not use missiles. They used 30mm cannons. The rounds shredded the boat's bridge in a matter of seconds. The hull was cut in half by the sheer volume of fire. The boat ignited instantly as the fuel tanks were perforated. It fell vertically into the dark water, leaving only a spreading slick of burning oil. Impact. Target destroyed, Sullivan reported. Moving to the next. They are not stopping. The smoke from the burning ships and coastal batteries climbed into the morning sky, a black pillar that could be seen from space. The dead silence of the radio was gone, replaced by the screams of the dying and the relentless thunder of the guns. Both nations had crossed the line. There was no going back to the 11-second shadow. The sky over the Strait of Hormuz was no longer blue. It was a chaotic tapestry of white missile contrails, black, oily smoke, and the brilliant, rhythmic flashes of anti-aircraft fire. Major Elias Miller banked hard in his F-22 Raptor, watched as a second Iranian missile boat disintegrated under a rain of 30mm cannon fire from the Super Hornets. The ocean was littered with the burning husks of vessels and the drifting orange life rafts of sailors who had survived the initial blasts. Magic. Ghost 1-1. The surface threat in Sector 4 is neutralized, Miller reported. I am bingo fuel. I am heading for the deck. Copy. Ghost, the controller replied. The Iranian batteries at Jask have ceased fire. We are seeing a general withdrawal of all coastal units. On the bridge of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the silence was heavy. The red battle lights were still pulsing, but the roar of the phalanx guns had stopped. Captain Sarah Vance stood by the glass tactical table, staring at the damage reports. The USS Higgins was listing 5 degrees to port, thick black smoke pouring from the jagged hole in its superstructure. 2 other escorts had taken near misses, their hulls peppered with shrapnel. Losses? Vance asked. 1 Super Hornet confirmed lost. 1 Growler heavily damaged but limping toward Al Udeid, the tactical officer said. On the Iranian side, at least 4 missile boats destroyed, 2 coastal batteries leveled. Estimated casualties in the hundreds. It is a bloodbath, ma'am. Vance looked out toward the horizon. The spot where the silver object had appeared was now indistinguishable from the rest of the Gulf. Gone, ma'am. No sonar trace, no thermal. It is as if it never existed, except for the fact that it started a war and then vanished. Inside his cockpit, Colonel Reza Abbas crossed the Iranian coastline. He flew low, hugging the jagged peaks of the Zagros Mountains. His F-4 Phantom was screaming, the engines protesting the hours of high-stress maneuvering. Beside him, his weapon systems officer sat in total silence. The black tablet on the console was dead. The screen was a blank, dark mirror reflecting their terrified faces. What was it, Colonel? The officer finally whispered. It was the end of us, Abbas replied. The Americans. Us. All of it. We are children playing with matches in a room full of gasoline. And the owner of the house just walked in. Abbas looked at his fuel gauge. He had just enough to reach his base at Shiraz. He felt no victory. He had held a Raptor in a gun track for 11 seconds, a feat that would be whispered about in bars for decades. 11:10 in the morning. The last of the American fighters touched down on the deck of the Lincoln. Ground crews in colored jerseys swarmed the aircraft. Major Miller climbed out of his cockpit, his legs feeling like lead. He stood on the flight deck and looked toward the north. The smoke from the Iranian coast was still visible, a thin, dark line on the horizon. Elias, Commander Sullivan said, walking over to him. Rook made it. The SAR team picked him up 10 minutes ago. He's alive. Miller nodded, but he didn't speak. He was thinking about the silver object. He was thinking about the way his instruments had died. They were all just pieces on a board they didn't own. The crisis had resolved, but the mystery had only deepened. Both nations began the long process of counting their dead and rewriting their history books to explain a battle that officially never happened. 3 hours later, at the Pentagon and the Iranian Supreme National Security Council, the digital maps were no longer pulsing with red threat icons. The high-altitude reconnaissance drones, both American Global Hawks and Iranian Shaheds, circled the Strait of Hormuz like vultures over a graveyard. They captured high-resolution images of the aftermath, the charred remains of the USS Higgins being towed toward Bahrain, and the smoldering ruins of the Jask missile batteries. The cost of the 11-second shadow was now quantified in billions of dollars and dozens of lives. But the official reports on both sides remained curiously empty. In a windowless room deep within the Pentagon, a board of 5-star generals sat in silence. They were watching the synchronized playback of Major Elias Miller's gun camera. The footage showed the F-4 Phantom holding the Raptor in its sights with a stability that defied every known law of aerodynamics. Then, it showed the total electronic blackout. It was a coordinated pulse suppressing all silicon-based processing. It didn't just jam us, it turned us off. And then, it turned us back on, only when it decided the engagement was over. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs leaned forward. And the Iranian launch? Did they trigger it? The data suggests the launch was slave to the same source. The Iranians thought they were firing at a ghost ship. Both sides were played like instruments. 3 days later, at Shiraz Air Base, Iran, Colonel Reza Abbas sat in a small, sun-bleached courtyard, drinking bitter tea. His flight suit was clean, but his hands still bore the faint scent of hydraulic fluid. Across from him sat his weapons systems officer. The black box tablet had reportedly melted into a lump of inert plastic the moment it was disconnected from the Phantom's power bus. They are calling us heroes in the state media. Abbas looked up at the clear, empty sky. We are survivors of a demonstration. That thing in the water. It wasn't a weapon. It was a fence. It was showing us the limits of our cage. He thought about Major Miller. For 11 seconds, they had been the most significant pilots in history. Now, they were just men who knew how fragile their world really was. The strategic assessment reached the same conclusion. Stealth, speed, and electronic warfare were irrelevant against a power that could manipulate the fundamental forces of the vacuum. The encounter was officially buried under a mountain of equipment failure and atmospheric anomaly reports. The public was told of a tense naval standoff, but the pilots knew. The sailors on the Higgins knew. They knew that the Strait of Hormuz was no longer just a choke point for oil. It was a threshold. The next time that shadow falls, I don't think we'll be given 11 seconds to walk away, Miller whispered in a classified debriefing. Both nations prepared for a war they finally understood they could never win. History had shifted. The ghost remained.